So I'm going to walk you through a business plan draft. So this is a business plan that is very bare bones. It has no design elements to it. It simply just focuses on the text to kind of give you an idea of what direction you should go into when putting this together. You obviously would put your designs together the way you want, nice little pictures, etc., etc. This is not that. This is just simply a content-driven piece to guide you through some of the slides that are essential for you to include in your business plan for a slate deal. Simple example here on the title sheet, I call it Prodco, short for Production Company, Diversity in Motion. You can call this an outline. You can also call this an executive summary where you list the content. I keep it straightforward. I'm talking about the industry, the opportunity, the scope, the financials, and the team. There are other things you can mention here, but I'm just going to focus you on the main things that you definitely don't want to forget. So when we talk about the industry, this is personal preference, right? I like talking about the landscape. I like leading the investors through a little bit of a journey as to where things were, where they are, and where the opportunity lies. So I start with the indie boom. When major studios decided to focus on tentpole blockbusters, they opened up a space for the independent producer to fill a niche. That's usually how I start, so that the investors understand how do we independents relate to the studios and how do we make ourselves valuable. So then I talk about the disruption in the industry that has to do with the streamers launching, the audiences changing their viewer behavior, which is absolutely important, of course, can't ignore it, how binge watching became a thing, how the networks had to reduce license fees that they pay us because they were losing audiences, and how we as indies can be extremely versatile in making sure that we generate projects with feasible budgets and can elevate the buying power that is decreased, or can help the buying power that is decreased by offering high quality product for a feasible price. So then I like talking about the content wars, really talking about that there is a lot of content that is needed, that all the streamers and networks and studios kind of fighting for what's the best content, and are trying to figure out how do we produce high caliber content for an amount we can actually afford, because all of them now have to save, and we can step in and help by giving them what they need. And what they need is, and we mentioned it here, the demand for content that is globally viable and can travel outside of the US as well as be successful in the US. So we're talking about the content component here a little bit, about what is being in demand and the fact that there's so much demand right now because there are so many streaming services and content providers. And then we're talking about today, what is happening today. Feasible budgets are key, is what I kind of focus on here. You can do your own version of this, by the way, but this is what I did, or this is what I use for a lot of my business plans, where I focus on the journey from how do we become, what happened in the industry, how do we stand out, and then what do we do today. So today it's really all about understanding the pressure of creating feasible budgets and high quality content, because that is what the market can bear. So this is where the independent projects lead their marketplace. And then of course I talk about statistics, what's going on in the industry. It's a $26 billion industry, not small. I talk about film and television movies, how they're being watched. 80% are being watched on services, streaming services, and on television and on subscription services, etc. 20% in the movie theaters. We talk about what that means, 78.5 billion increase since 2020, especially in the mobile, meaning streaming industry. We're talking about subscriptions online. We have to look at that marketplace as well. 1.3 billion increase since 2021. We're looking at what films are released on TV and on platforms here, because some of the movies we're doing will not have theatrical release, so I want to focus on the other versions of releases as well. So I'm going to talk about here statistically over 180 films were released in 21, 90% increase since 2017. So obviously we want to look on Google or other online pages for data that's a little more relevant. I put this together a few years ago. So you want to look at what is recently there in regard to statistics, and then we're talking about streaming content since 2020, 120 million viewers and consumers in the US watched content on streaming platforms, 113 million, sorry, that's a lot. But 331 billion is estimated to be generated in revenues by 2030. So we're also going to talk about what's happening in the streaming world, because it's such a big component in our world today, and then talk about how does this translate to in numbers and statistics. So the industry, it's always good to research the recent statistics that would apply to the content that you're producing. So you go from global industry into viewer behavior, into what distribution models apply for you and what have they generated statistically, and then into what kind of content you're producing and what that has generated statistically. So the consumer demand for new content forces distributors to increase content output. So my point here is that yes, we are delivering feasibly budget, top quality content, but it's also because the demand is huge. So I want to let my investor know he's stepping into an industry where there is a huge demand, and that's really what the statistics need to lead us to. So I found this little graph here. Graphs are great too, by the way, if you can find them. I found this and it shows what kind of genres are the leading genres in the marketplace, and I put these arrows on the genres that I want to do that will be in my slate. So that you might have different arrows in yours because you might do different things. So the one thing I'm not doing, you see here, that's actually the one thing that makes the most money is horror. So I'm not doing that. But you might. So this might be a great slate for you. So I'm going through the genres that would be applicable for me in the slate that I would be putting together. And I mark how much in indie films are these genres turning into profit. So that's kind of what the slate is about. It says profit per genre. So I'll talk about the opportunity. I'll talk about the opportunity in a sense that we repeat that we want to fill in the niche of increased demand for feasibly budgeted content. I'm mentioning here the romantic comedy genre because that was one business plan that I developed for someone. And you could obviously mention globally viable genres. We could replace the word romantic comedy with commercially or globally viable genres. And then we're looking at, and here actually I did, selection of globally viable genres in regards to scripts. So what are we looking for? These are the kind of scripts we're looking for. We are looking for and will establish risk-averse investment structures by implementing multiplexer slate components. So that's part of the opportunity. We will block production, so meaning we will produce the projects in a block to save costs and expenses. We will, of course, engage industry established executives to help us select content, develop content, produce, finance, and distribute the slate content. We will predetermine a distribution strategy. We will elevate, in this case, the business plan was looking for someone who was wanting to elevate the local film industry, may or may not apply to us. And they also wanted an education component in their in their professional, to educate their professionals locally in regards to global film and television production. So those last two might not apply to you, but they were part of the example that I was putting together, so I'm just going to leave them here. I actually use this also when I go, and I do this often, I go into other countries and teach, industry seminars. Like, in September, I'm going to go to Georgia again, the country right next to Russia. I've been there before, where I do this. So for them, it would be something like this, where they want to elevate the local industry and they want to train their people. So for you, this might not be applicable, but I want you to focus on the opportunity itself, the risk connected to the opportunity, the way you save money, how you're going to establish the opportunity by working with track record driven people, and what genres you're going to focus on. All of this needs to be mentioned in the opportunity overview. And then we have to remember that these investors have no idea what happens when. So it doesn't hurt to put a slide in there that talks about what happens since the idea, from the idea to the revenues. So here you put in, content selection and development at step 1, step 2 is financing, step 3 is production, step 4 is distribution, step 5 is revenues. So they understand kind of the world that they're moving in and how things are moving in that world. It's always nice to kind of put that on a slide so that they can get like a tangible, step-by-step overview of how things work. And then I go into each of the phases that are connected to these steps. So I'll talk about step 1, content and development. What happens there? We're developing the script. We are looking for scripts that are saleable in the global marketplace. We're securing the rights for those scripts. Once the rights are secured, we're looking to have them meet the distributor's demands. So we're going to develop them to a point where sales agent and distributors would like them. We are looking for genre-specific scripts that will be, sent to distributors and sales agents who are genre-specific as well. Meaning we're not going to send the horror script to a sales agent that sells romantic comedies. That's what we're talking about here. We are targeting distributors that are working on the kind of content that we're producing and developing. And then we'll talk about talent packaging with casting directors and talent agents to cast a name actor in a lead role, and that we have to do a pay or play engagement here. We'll talk about the preliminary production costs, so we get a range of where the budget would lay until we know for sure. And then we'll talk about establishing a finance plan, projected revenues, securing funding, and including non-recoupable funding sources. All of this happens in development. And we're going to talk about the distribution agreements with the sales agents, all of which are also starting to be negotiated in the development phase. So here you can add to this list what happens in development, whatever you do. It is good to list this for investors particularly because they don't understand what happens when, and they want to know what's going on in the development phase, what's going on in the finance phase. So for them, it kind of helps them understand the universe that they're moving into and what it all entails. So here in this section, the financing plan, the financing phase, which describes what happens from the financing to production. We're talking about, in the beginning, we're establishing a project assessment overview, which has the project information, the talent that is targeted or attached, the team behind the project, estimated budget, preliminary finance plan, distribution strategy. All of this is mentioned in a project overview. Then we'll discuss projections and sales estimates from bankable sales agent. Those will be established in the finance plan. Finance phase. We are securing pre-sale agreements in the finance phase. We're selecting our finance partners, which are banks, lenders, and investors. We are negotiating finance agreements for loans and equity investments. We are engaging the completion bond company. We'll obviously talk about what that is. We're finalizing the shooting schedule, the budget, and the production cash flow plan. We'll talk to the collection agent who will draft the CAMA. And we'll talk about the closing process that will now start once the financing phase is concluded. So you can go into more detail here, absolutely, as to what each section entails, and be specific about what it means. What is a completion bond company? What is a collection agent? You can do that, but you want to really focus on this is the finance phase, and what happens in that phase. This is what we're going to cover on this slide. And then we're talking about the production phase, which is from pre-production to delivery. We establish the final production budget, the final shooting schedule, and the final cash flow plan. We are finalizing talent agreements. We are looking to select experienced production crew and finalizing crew agreements. We are establishing our production insurance as required by financiers and distributors, as well as production companies. We are looking for locations that are feasible and that work with our story. We are looking for pre-production. In the pre-production phase, we're looking for all the production elements, that we need to finalize. Jesus, we want to finalize the production elements. That's what I wanted to say. Now there we have a sentence. So we need to explain to the investor that in pre-production, we are actually planning the production. So that's what that means. So we are then talking about how we are producing the movies, ideally in a block, to ensure top production quality, but also save some money. And we'll talk about all the elements that are requirement by the sales agent and distribution partners that we need to generate as delivery elements. So all of this will be mentioned for the production phase. And then I like to mention the distribution phase, basically from production or delivery to distribution. I talk about sales agents that are used to sell international rights. I talk about talent agents in the US that are used to sell the US rights. And then we'll talk about trailers and titles and so forth, what we need to do in order to start the distribution phase and get the movie out internationally and in the US. And then we're mentioning the leading film markets that we're going to visit: AFM, TIFF, Berlinale, Cannes Film Festival, MIP TV, MIP Comnet, P, etc. So we're mentioning all the leading film and TV markets. We'll talk about some of the specific buyers that we might target for certain content in the US and internationally. We'll also talk about the fact that our slate volume provides strategic advantages for us in distribution, because it allows the buyer to come to us, see our product, and we become a one-stop shop for volume production. And we're going to talk about how the slate volume provides opportunities for us to do output deals with certain distributors. And here we are talking about the revenue phase, where we generate the distribution revenues and distribute profits. So here we are talking about the distribution license agreements that are established by the sales agent, who is now generating distribution revenues, which are placed into a collection account that is a neutral agent, like escrow agent, that monitors all revenues and manages all expenses. So here we can talk about the collection agent. And then we mentioned the collection agent. I actually mentioned it. I mentioned Freeway Entertainment because it's great when the investors can go to that website and see all the amazing movies that they manage. So it's great for a track record. So you should mention them. It doesn't hurt. And we then explain that they are like an escrow service, ensuring and securing the distribution revenues and the disbursements of revenues in connection with contractual obligations. So that's important. And that happens and is described in the CAMA, the Collection Agent Management Agreement, which we mentioned here too. What is the CAMA? Who is a signatory to the CAMA? What does the CAMA do? It describes and designs the waterfall, etc. So all of this should be described for the revenue phase. And then of course we want to have a waterfall in here, a financial structure and a waterfall. So the financial structure would include the finance plan if you want. We have a loan that could cover 20 to 50% of the production cost. The term is 12 to 24 months. So we know, aha, the loan is about 2 years, and the investor knows too. And then we have non-recoupable finance sources of at least 20%, and we might have some brand integration and sponsorship of between 5 and 10%. So we mentioned that. And then we talk about the equity investment that could be anywhere from 30 to 50% of the production cost. It will be receiving a preferred premium of 20%, and it will allow the investor to have IP ownership and profit participation. So that's the financial structure we mentioned on the left here. And then we talk about the waterfall. How does the waterfall work? We have distribution revenues. They go to the collection agent. They pay for distribution expenses. They pay for the loan. And then they pay the equity investor. So it's a very basic waterfall, but it helps the investor to understand how the money flows and how the waterfall is structured. And in the scope, I talk about the action items of our production company. What do we do? How do we apply our skill? So here I say we have 30 projects that we are developing, and we're developing them to become viable films in the budget ranges of $1 to $10 million. So now we know, aha, we are working on 30 projects. Not all of them will be chosen, but at least this will suggest to the investor they're not starting from scratch. They have projects that they're already looking at. That's important to mention. And then we talk about our relationships with established partners like production companies, distribution companies, and buyers. So we talk about our relationships with people that are important to the process. So that's something for you to remember. And then we talk about what we do. We oversee all the steps from the inception of the idea to generating profits. That includes development of sellable scripts, packaging, risk-averse finance plans, budgeting, working with experienced producers, working with experienced department heads and experienced directors. We're talking about working with established and bankable distribution partners. We're talking about protecting revenues and profits through the comma, and we're talking about establishing a content library and what that is, especially in terms of an exit strategy. And then next we're mentioning the slate. As I mentioned before, 30 projects that are going to go in the slate. We have track record producers that we work with, obviously, to produce all these. We can potentially not do them all ourselves, so we have producers that we work with, but we will oversee the production to make sure it's top quality. We will talk about the bankable sales agents that we work with to approve the selected content to make sure it does meet not only the projections but also the financial criteria that we have set in place for this fund. And we'll talk about the strict creative and performance criteria that we employ for every project and for the entire slate, and for the investment that we make into every project and into the slate. So we'll talk about, here is the strict creative criteria that we want to see, which has to do with what kind of scripts do we want, what kind of genre are we looking for, what are the creative packaging components in regards to director, cast, etc. And then we'll also talk about performance criteria. What do they need to meet? What do these projects have to project? A certain number in international, a certain number in domestic. How is it projected? By bankable sales agents. So these are the things we talk about. And then we talk about our focus on commercial genres, action, thriller, comedy, sci-fi, family, because these are the genres that travel well and that optimize distribution revenues. We talk about when we do what. We'd like to do 6 films per year over the next 3 years. And then we talk about the fact that revenues are expected to arrive within 6 months to 3 years of the completion of the film. So this will give the investor an overview of what happens, why does it happen, who does it happen with, and what is the time frame connected to it. So here's the distribution strategy component that we're looking at. Obviously, again, we work on projects that are in demand globally. We also mention here that we will not work with a sales agent that charges us more than 25%. That's important to know for the waterfall component. We mentioned that we want pre-sales to be established to verify the market demand for each project. Otherwise, we're not going to invest in it. We're going to talk about the fact that we have a certain projection component for ROIs and other shareholders and stakeholders, so that the investors know we're not going to include a project that doesn't meet the minimum ROI that we want to hit with our projections. And then we are here talking about, and this is something that you can take or leave, in this situation we talked about a business structure that would include in the future to sell the content themselves, so we don't have to pay a sales agent to do it. But that's like a future expansion component in regards to distribution that could be applicable and was applicable in this finance plan that I worked on, and something that actually offers additional distribution revenues in future years because they derive from the 25% license fees that you would now charge rather than pay. I like putting in some distribution options with partners that one might want to work with. So I mixed it up to have low budget, partners, medium budget partners, high budget partners. So I mentioned these distribution partners on 2 slides that kind of reflect what I'm looking to produce and finance in the various budget ranges that I'm looking to produce and finance in, and the genres that I'm looking to do. So these distributors and sales agent work in those ranges. So I mentioned them here as option. These are the kind of people we would be working with and could be working with. That's really all it is. And then I kind of sum up a little bio about them. Yeah, I actually did this on 2 slides. You don't have to do 2 slides. If you have 1 slide with some distribution partners, that's plenty. I just went overboard because in the slate that I put together, we had budgets and movies of all different genres. And so I wanted to give them some options of who they could be working with. And then we go into the financial overview, our projections, that we are obviously working with track record driven partners in the distribution space in the US and international. And we are talking about the fact that we are very genre specific and we are focused on genres that are globally viable. We mentioned this before, but it is important to mention as a financial component as well, because here we are mentioning that distribution expenses and fees are not to be exceeding the projected amount that we put in our finance plan. So when we put in the finance plan, up to 25%, we can't charge more. So we need to really be careful with what we do and what we charge. So when we do projections, which we're going to do in the next slides, they need to meet the financial overview that we're mentioning. The overview also needs to include our investment criteria, and they need to be very specific. We are not doing anything, we're not including any movie that's more than $10 million. We want to see projections of at least 70% of the budget from international. We want to see at least 30% in pre-sales. We will not allow overages, which is why we put in a contingency. The finance plan must include 20% non-recoupable finance sources. The distribution cost cannot be more than 25%. We have finance charges finance charges in connection with the loan that cannot be more than 20% of the budget, but the finance charges can also not be more than 20%. We have investment terms that allow 20% preferred return for the equity investor. We have profit participation components that reflect industry standards. We have a production schedule that we need to adhere to because delivery dates are important. And we have a collection agent management agreement that will take care of the revenues and protect the revenues. So now we're talking about financial and distribution elements. Here we mentioned that we want 30% pre-sales, sold for maximum 25% distribution fees. We want 20% from a lender maximum 30% of the budget with a term of 12 to 24 months. We want 20% of the budget to be coming to non-recoupable finance sources. We want 30% or 50% if there's no gap loan from the equity investor, offering them a 20% return on the money plus a profit participation. We want to have distribution windows. So for the first run, we're telling the investor the first one will be somewhere between 3 to 5 years. You can expect to receive monies coming in from 6 months all the way up to 3 years. We'll talk about the second run, could be generating between 30 to 50% of the first run. And then we're going to talk about the library value, which could be anywhere from 5 to 30% of the first run. It depends, obviously, as we mentioned in the library module, very much on what is in the library and how does the content perform. But this is kind of a strategy for the library that works for the genres that we are focusing on. So we let the investor know, here's how the financial distribution elements that you need to consider and how we apply them. We walk them on a risk mitigation sheet through all the various risks that are connected with the development, the production, the performance, meaning the distribution, and the revenues. So we dive into this and talk about how we effectively and efficiently mitigate risks in these different sectors. And you can do that, you can do it like this, or you can, look into other risk mitigation components that you are aware of that could help you in mitigating risk efficiently and effectively. That's really the point of this slide. We need to mention the risk, and we need to mention how we mitigate the risk. I have here a production timeline where I mentioned the development phase. How long does that take? 1 to 6 months. I'm mentioning how long the production phase would be, 2 to 6 weeks. I'm talking about the production, well, that's the pre-production phase, 2 to 6 weeks, production phase, 2 to 6 weeks, depending on what we're producing, and then the post-production phase, 1 to 2 months, also depending on what we're producing. But it gives the investor an overview as to how long does it take to get anything done and what happens in that time frame, in that phase. So I like doing this because this helps investors understand the process and the industry, the production process for sure, and the industry a little better, and also explains to them how long things take and what kind of time frame we're looking for in establishing the production timeline. And that leads into the timeline, meaning what happens when. Year 1, what do we do? We're selecting projects, we're developing script in the first quarter. In the second quarter, we're finalizing our fundraise to be able to afford the production. In the third quarter, we're hoping to produce our slate film 1 and 2. In the fourth quarter, film 3 and 4. Second year, we're producing film 5 and 6 in quarter 1. Quarter 2 has film 7. Quarter 3 has film 8 and 9. Quarter 4 has film 10 that we're producing. And then the year 3, we have films 11, 12, film 13, 14, 15, and film 16. So we are producing the films, and you can have less or more films, it's entirely up to you, but you want to let the investor know what happens during the years, those 3 years that we're focusing on in this business plan, what happens here in regards to action items. And then I put the slates kind of together in regards to, what is the film, how much money are we investing, what is the loan amount that we're getting, what is the non-recoupable finance sources. So the first slide here is talking about the films, the start dates, the budgets, how they're financed, and how much needs to be recouped. So for example, film 1, 10 million bucks. The equity we need is 3.5 million. The loan we're going to take out to cover the pre-sale and gap loan is going to be 45%, that's 4.5 million. The non-recoupable finance sources is going to be 20%, that's 2 million. So what needs to be recouped here? We don't have to recoup the non-recoupable finance sources. So we're really looking at $8 million to be recouped. That's our expense. That's what we need to define later as we have to pay this back. So that's why we mention it here. So the investor wants to know, what is my recoupment component? What do I have to pay in expenses, which is the loan and the equity? And what do I get for free, which is the non-recoupable finance source? So I do this for all 4 films that I want to do in year 1. And I connect them to start dates, which are important when I do the cash flow plan, which we're going to have to do as well for this business plan. So we're going to, give them an overview of the finance sources and what needs to be recouped in connection with the budget. So here in this slide, we basically go into the revenue components for each of the 4 films that we just looked at in slate year 1. So remember, the film number 1 was a $10 million movie. We're expecting it to generate 35% from the US. That's $3.5 million. The US talent agent will charge us 5% of that. 5% of 3.5 million is $1,075,000. So we're deducting that, and we're left with the US revenues at $3,325,000. So that's the US, already deducting the cost, right? So then we're going into international. For film 1, 85% is what we believe this movie can generate. That's $8.5 million. Then we know we have to pay the sales agent 20%. In this case, that is $1,007,000. So we're left with $6.8 million from international revenues. And when I add that to the US, I have total net revenues for this movie of $10,125,000. So that's already my net. My costs are already deducted here. So when we saw in the earlier slide that we have to recoup the bank loan and the equity at $8 million, we see here that we're going to have about $2 million in profits on this first film. So I do this for all 4 films so that the investor gets a basic idea, basic overview of what is being generated and what are the costs in connection with what is being generated. So then I do the same for year 2. Here we have film 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and their start dates, their budgets, their financing plans. So I see exactly what happens in year 2 at what time. And here we have year 3, where we have some more. No, we don't have year 3. We have year 2 still. We have revenues from year 2. So film 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are now generating revenues. We are applying the costs in connection with those revenues. So we see exactly how much money they're making. It grows from gross distribution revenues and net, which is the distribution revenue that's available to us to pay off the investment, the loan, and generate profits. So here we have the same for year 3, film 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Start dates, budgets, finance plan, and net recoupment that has to be repaid. Here are the revenues connected to film 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, and the related costs in connection to those revenues. And the last slide here is the summary. So the production volume of all our movies ended up being $77 million. The equity we need to invest to make those movies is $26.95 million. The total loans that we need to repay here is $34,650,000. So altogether, our repayments, equity and loans, will be $61,600,000, which leaves us with a net revenue of $16,363,000, which is an ROI of 61%. Now, this is kind of the summary of the overview. We can go, if we want to, in the business plan. We don't have to, but we can go into details in regards to cash flow plans. I don't always do that, and here is why. I don't want to give the investor too much in terms of financials, specifically when it comes to when monies are generated, because they will call me up and say, in your projection, it says that in month 3 after delivery, we're making 2 million such and such and such and such. And it was a projection, and we maybe haven't generated that in month 3 after delivery. So I don't want to get those phone calls. So that's why I'm not necessarily doing cash flows in business plans. I do cash flows for myself. I do cash flows that will tell me what do I need, what money do I need when, how does it flow in the cash flow. I do that, and we will be doing that in this course as well. But for the business plan, I would caution you maybe not to put in detailed cash flows, because they can potentially harm more than help. And then the team, obviously, you know, you do your team. I put in the team for the production company. I put in the team, or I put in the sales agent or sales agents I work with. I put in my agency, Gersh agency, that manages the US. And I put in the creative and production team, which may not be people that are employed by me. It might be the people that are connected to the product and the projects. So you want to mention them for sure, because this is your director, this could be your track record driven producer. These are all the people that lend professional expertise and track record to your movies. So that is what you would mention in your team. So you give a little bio of who they are, and that's what you mention on the next slides, which I don't have here because I don't have your team. So in the end, you can put a contact slide in there to say you can reach me here. You can also put a slide in, and I don't have this here, but you can, and I actually mentioned this in the module later when we talk about this a little more. You can put like an ask. You know, when you have the financing plan done and the financials offered, you say, dear investor, I want you to give me $30 million in equity. I mean, you know, or we need $30 million in equity, and I need you, investor, to give me $2 million of that. And what would that offering look like? You can talk about that if your investors are individuals that are paying into a fund, and you wouldn't really talk about that if your investor or investment company that you work with, that you're pitching this to, is like a hedge fund or a film fund that will basically give you the entire 30 million. So it is then really up to who you're giving this business plan to, in regards to what ask slide you want to put in there. So the ask slide is really driven by who gets this presentation. So that's something you might want to switch depending on who the business plan is going to. So again, this is a very bare bones, boring, visually boring business plan. Yours would not look this way. You would have beautiful visuals and make it really nice on Canva or PowerPoint or whatever you choose. But I wanted you to see what the bare bones are that need to go in your business plan when we work on this together. So these are kind of the slides that you need to fill with the kind of information that you saw here. You obviously adjust it to your slate, to your production company, to what you do, to your team, and the way you want to do it. But you want to hit these pointers. You want to hit these things for sure in the business plan in your own version. So we'll talk about this much more, but I just wanted to give you this kind of black and white, literally black and white kind of example of what the main pointers are that you should be focusing on. And of course, we'll talk about it and we'll answer all the questions in our workshop sessions, which is where we'll dive into this a lot deeper. But now you have at least an overview, you see what is expected, and you can kind of prepare yourself mentally for what we're going to be doing. All right.